Hello, everyone. Charles Watts here. Welcome to another edition of Inside Arsenal. I hope you're having a very good start to your week, wherever you're watching or listening to this around the world. We are now 7 days away from Arsenal returning to action with that game at Nottingham Forest next Tuesday night. A bit of a shame. We've got another free weekend coming up, but I suppose only got ourselves to blame, haven't we? Take some chances against Liverpool. We've got an FA Cup game to look forward to this weekend, but didn't happen. So we've got another weekend off. The players having another bit of downtime at the moment. Couple of days off to start the week after the win against Palace at the weekend. Obviously, they've been away to Dubai before the Palace game, but they were working pretty hard over there. This is a couple of days to rest up ahead of that game against Forest, and they should probably take advantage of it because there's not going to be too much downtime between that Forest game and the end of the season, but you think they're going to be pretty well refreshed by the time that Forest game comes around. It's going to be about one game in about 3 weeks, and at this stage of the season in England, that is pretty much unheard of. So I don't think tiredness or fatigue or anything like that can be used as an excuse for, certainly for a little while anyway. But the busy period of the season is starting very, very soon. Quite a bit to talk about today. Lots of injury news to discuss. Jurrien, Timber, Thomas Partey, Declan Rice, of course, who went off injured against Crystal Palace. Got plenty of questions and comments from you. We'll look at what's been happening in terms of AFCON and the Asia Cup as well with the Arsenal interest. So plenty to get stuck into. And we'll start with some news that I have on Thomas Partey, who, of course, feels like has been out forever. He is close to coming back. We know that. And from what I'm hearing, I think he might well. The plan, hopefully, is that he could well return to training this week and that potentially could feature against Forest on Tuesday night. That is the plan. Obviously, that can all change. It all depends how things go, and the final decision has to be taken during the week. But the plan, as far as I'm aware, is that he is to come back to training this week, which of course will be great news if that is the case and it does all happen, everything does stay on track and Thomas Partey does return. It'll be fantastic news for Arsenal because there's no doubt they have missed him. And if he can come back and he can stay fit, then it's going to have a huge, huge impact on Arsenal's second half of the season because when he's fit and he's firing, there are not many midfielders better than Thomas Partey in this league. And it does also raise the potential, the possibility of seeing Partey and Declan Rice play together throughout the second half of the season, which again is a very, very enticing prospect indeed. So he obviously has been out for a long time and Arsenal are going to manage this return to action very, very carefully. They're not going to take any risks if, you get into the next couple of days when they come back from their days off and they think, you know what, no, we still think you need to take a couple more extra days before we push you back, then I'm sure they will do that. But the plan, as far as I'm aware and have been told, is that Thomas Partey is expecting to be back training this week and is still very much targeting being involved in the squad for the game against Forest on Tuesday night. So we'll wait and see if that remains the case. And if it is, like I said, it will be fantastic news for Arsenal. Love to get your views on what you think, what sort of impact you think Thomas Partey can have on Arsenal's second half of the season if he stays fit and where you see him playing and how Mikel Arteta you feel should use the midfield going forward. If you've got Partey, Rice, Jorginho all fit, who plays where with Odegaard and Havertz and Smith Rowe? What is your ideal midfield three? Or do you think we need to see a bit of a tweak in formation? Can you play Rice and Partey together like we saw Jorginho and Rice play against Liverpool? Would love to get your views on it because it's going to be really intriguing to see what Mikel Arteta does going forward when it comes to these players when they are all fit and available. And it's certainly, he's got some really strong options there. When you're talking about Partey, Jorginho and Rice. I mean, there's three fantastic sort of holding midfield players there to choose between. So, yeah, fingers crossed, all goes well. And we will see Thomas Partey back in action very, very soon. And on Declan Rice, obviously limped off in that game against Crystal Palace. Mentioned the word hammy to Emil Smith-Rowe. Mikel Arteta speaking about him afterwards in the press conference. Confirmed it was a bit of an issue, said he had a sensation in his hamstring. Sammy Mockbell at the Daily Mail reporting late yesterday evening that Arsenal are hopeful that it is nothing too serious. And the initial checks on Declan Rice are that he should be okay to play against Nottingham Forest. They'll continue to sort of check up on him over the next couple of days or so when they come back to London Colney. But all signs are at the moment, according to Sammy, that Declan Rice will be okay to play against Nottingham Forest. And again, that is just huge news for Arsenal. As I said in yesterday's show, it would have been such a massive shame if Declan had picked up something properly serious. And, as we see sometimes with hamstrings, you can be out from 3 to 6 weeks to 2 months. If it was a serious one for Declan Rice, just as Thomas Partey came back fit, in one way, yes, you could say, well, at least Arsenal got Thomas Partey back. But also, it would have been such a shame to see Thomas Partey back and then not have him alongside Declan Rice, because that's been a partnership we've been waiting to see. We saw it in the Community Shield against Manchester City, but that's it so far this season. And we've been waiting to see it. And so it would have been a real shame if Declan Rice had got injured just before that. I mean, it would have been a shame just because if he got injured, because he's such a key player for Arsenal, has been so impressive this season, but doubly so if it happened just at the time that Thomas Partey comes back. So fingers crossed, all is well, and Declan Rice is going to be fine to play against Nottingham Forest. And again, fingers crossed, hopefully might well be in the same squad as Thomas Partey, which would be a massive boost. And Sammy also confirming in that report he did on Declan yesterday that Jurrien Timber could well be back in about a month in terms of training, which would be a huge boost and could potentially play up to the final couple of months of Arsenal's season. Again, with Timber, and I've spoken about it lots and lots of times, and the information I have on it as well is that it will be absolutely no risk. And it's still a little bit too early to put a proper time frame on Timber, which is absolutely understandable, because the second you put an absolute, second Mikel Arteta comes back and says he's back in a month, then bang, the pressure is on him to come back in a month. And when you've been out for that sort of length of time with an injury as serious as his, the last thing you need is expectation and pressure. So Arsenal are still very reluctant to officially put sort of time frames on this, but he is doing very well. He is progressing very well. We saw the video that Arsenal posted from him in Dubai. I asked Mikel Arteta about it at his press conference last week, and he did confirm to me for the first time really so far this season that there was a chance, it was looking possible that Timber was going to be able to have an impact on Arsenal's season. And so, yeah, we could only be, sort of 6 weeks away really from seeing Timber potentially in and around the squad for the first time. And what a huge boost that would be for the second half of the season. So slowly but surely, some of the injured players are beginning to come back. We're still waiting for Fabio Vieira, of course, to come back. He's still a couple of weeks away, I think a few weeks away. But he was over in Dubai doing some stuff in Dubai. But again, it was quite a big operation he had to fix the issue. And but once he's back, then fingers crossed, if everyone stays okay, then suddenly you've got a lot of options for Mikel Arteta to go with over the second half of the season, and that will be a huge boost. I mean, we saw what Timber did in pre-season. Again, it's very hard. You don't want to put pressure on him when he comes back to be like, you've got to be the player that we saw in pre-season, because he's going to have to be eased in. We've seen it with players who have come back from ACL injuries. Although when they first come back, it's great they're back. It does take them a lot of time to pick up speed, to mentally, I think, get over, those first tackles, those first proper sprints, first proper twists in a Premier League game. The pressure you have to put on that knee, I think mentally is a big, big thing. And it does take him a lot of time to get back. So even if we do see him, say, for the final 6 weeks, 2 months of the season, it might not be until next season that we really see him back to his very, very best when he's had another pre-season under his belt. But it will still be a huge boost. And when you look at what he does and what he offers to this squad, the positions that he can play in, it'll be massive for Mikel Arteta if he does come back. So it is looking good on the injury front for now, but as is the way, you've got to wait and see. We've got to keep our fingers crossed that everything goes well. Okay, before we move on to what's been going on sort of internationally, dramatic day at the AFCON yesterday, unbelievable scenes at AFCON. Reports in Italy, they're not stopping about AC Milan trying to sign Jakub Kiwior this month. They continue to come out constantly that they're going to try and get him. They admit in the reports that Mikel Arteta and Arsenal are very reluctant to let him go, which is absolutely understandable. I don't see any way this happens. I say that it's always a bit dangerous to say something like that, because you never know in football, but it just wouldn't make any sense from an Arsenal point of view. And the messages we're getting from Arsenal is that there's going to be no significant departures this window, unless an unbelievable bid comes in for any players. Then they might have to think about it. But, Milan trying to get Kiwior on loan until the end of the season, even if there's an obligation in it, it just doesn't make any sense, because you're weakening your squad, which is already stretched. Kiwior's already having to cover at left back because of the injuries to Kiwior, to Tomiyasu's issues, the fact he's gone away as well. To suddenly let a player who can play play left back and play centre back, he was used again at the weekend. It just would make absolutely no sense. Anyway, his agent has been talking about it amid all the links to a return to Italy. his agent's been speaking to Polish media, and he said, "Look, Kuba is an Arsenal player. There are no signs that they want to get rid of him, and I don't think anything will happen in the winter window. Come the summer, it might be different. You might look at it. He's been here 18 months, hasn't really forced his way into the Mikel's plans on a real consistent basis. I think he's a tidy player. I think he's looked good, especially when he plays at centre back. But if Arsenal, if there's this interest from Italy, does culminate in a decent offer coming in, I'm sure they'll probably think about it in the summer. But for the winter window, as the agent was saying here, it just looks really, really unlikely. And that's all I can say. It's the messages that I have is that it looks unlikely. And I just can't see that it would be anything that Arsenal would entertain again, unless a big, big offer came in. And that does not look likely this window. Mad day at AFCON yesterday. If you're watching, you'll know what I'm talking about. Just genuinely one of the most dramatic sort of half an hour or 20 minutes worth of football I've seen in a long, long time, with the Egypt game going on at the same time as the Ghana game. It just looked like there was so many different scenarios happening, and it looked like Ghana were through and cruising, then Egypt were through and cruising, then suddenly Ghana were out. It was just unbelievable. If you weren't watching, Ghana were 2-0 up against Mozambique, which looked like they were absolutely cruising to going through to the knockout stages. Egypt were losing to Cape Verde, who were top of the table. Then Egypt equalised, and that looked like it could be enough if they got another goal. That goal didn't come, and then in the last minute they scored to Egypt to go 2-1 up. Then there was a mad VAR check for ages for handball. It was eventually given. It looked like Egypt were through. Then Cape Verde equalised. It looked like Ghana were going through, but then Ghana, who were 2-0 up in injury time against Mozambique, managed to concede 2 injury time goals and ended up going out, or potentially going out. There's still a chance they could go through as one of the best third place finishers. That remains to be seen over the next few days. But just generally mad. I mean, El Neni didn't even play. He was watching watching it all unfold on the substitutes bench, and the drama, the emotion through all the players. You could see the Ghana players were absolutely distraught. I mean, earlier on in the day, I saw Ivory Coast, who were beaten 4-0. I can't remember who it was they were playing. Equatorial Guinea, was it? They lost 4-0 in their home tournament. It had real strong Brazil versus Germany vibes from the 2014 World Cup, when the hosts just got absolutely hammered and went out in a heartbreaking fashion. And that's what happened with Ivory Coast yesterday. And the emotion of their players on the bench, on the sidelines, and then watching it all it was just a mad day of AFCON football. Fantastic to watch. Not if you're a Ghana fan, and certainly not if you're an Ivory Coast fan, of course. But the long shot of it is that Egypt are staying in the tournament. So El Neni is staying in the tournament. Mohamed Salah was watching. And Arsenal fans are obviously very, very interested to see what's going on with Mohamed Salah at the moment. He's got this hamstring injury. He was over in Egypt for it. He's now coming back to the UK to continue treatment. It looks like the reports coming out of Egypt, it is worse than first feared, and he's going to be out for up to a month. If that is the case, of course, that means there's going to be no Mohamed Salah for Liverpool against Arsenal, even if Egypt get knocked out of the tournament. So we'll wait and see how that progresses. But yeah, just a crazy, crazy day. And yeah, just unbelievable. It really was just such a dramatic day's football. In terms of the Asia Cup, Tomiyasu's in action tomorrow. I think Japan just need a draw in their game, and then they go through to the knockout stages. So fully expecting that to happen, although they did lose to Iraq in the last game. Really surprising defeat there, and they were well beaten, really. 2-1 in the end. They got a late consolation. I think last minute Endo scored for Japan, but they need a draw to go through tomorrow, and that will mean Tomiyasu will stay for at least another week should that happen. So that's the latest when it comes to AFCON and the Asia Cup. Questions times now from you guys. Plenty of you getting involved as always. Thank you very much. Always appreciate your response. If you want to get involved in tomorrow's show, then please do respond in the comments section to this video with any sort of opinion you have, any question you want to ask about anything you've seen in this show or anything Arsenal related at all. Please do let me know in the comments below. Okay, here's one from Paul who says, "Hi Charles, do you think if we sign Zubimendi in the summer, that means one of Thomas Partey or Smith Rowe will be sold? As I'm sure he wouldn't want to come in and just sit on the bench, and I'm sure he wouldn't want to come in and sit on the bench." Look, I think there's a good chance that Thomas Partey will be sold this summer anyway. There was a good chance he would have been sold last summer, but no bids arrived for him, so he couldn't be sold. But I think if a decent bid comes in for him this summer, then I think Arsenal will certainly consider it. He'll have a year left on his contract. He's well into his 30s. Obviously, we know he's got his long line of injury issues. And so it just makes sense that Arsenal would consider it. I'm not saying they'll definitely sell him. It depends on the bid. But if one comes in and it's decent, then it wouldn't surprise me at all if Arsenal sold him. I don't think Smith Rowe really matters in terms of Zubimendi. But Arsenal have to think long term about their midfield. They've obviously got Declan Rice in there, which is great, and he's young. But then you've got Thomas Partey in his 30s, 1 year left on his contract. Jurrien in his 30s. He's out of contract this summer, but Arsenal do have the option to extend it. They haven't taken it yet, but I do expect that will happen. I'd be surprised if they don't, just because it makes sense to give him another year, I think, to keep him around for another year. Mohamed Elneny out of contract in his 30s. So they have to think long term. They've basically just got Declan Rice as a long-term option in midfield at the moment for Arsenal, if you don't consider someone like Sammy Lokonga, of course, who's out on loan, who's in his 20s. So they have to think long-term about what's going on in midfield, and that's why Zubimendi is a player that they're looking at, one of several players that they are looking at. So I don't necessarily think if he comes in, that means that someone has to be sold. I think that's just long-term planning, because players are going to be leaving over the next, certainly year, two, over the next maybe 6 months, but certainly the next 18 months when it comes to their key central midfielders. And so, I don't think it's necessarily tied between the two, but I do think there's a good chance Thomas Partey might well go this summer anyway, just because of everything that I've just mentioned there. Here's one from Paranoid Android 1979, who says, at the moment, there seem to be lots of complaints about the atmosphere being flat compared to last season. This is at the Emirates, of course, and also about a lot of people leaving early in games. What do you think the club can do to improve the situation now and also ahead of next season? Are there people in the club who are looking at these issues and contemplate what needs to be done in order to get closer to the vibe of last season? It's an interesting one. Look, the atmosphere is definitely different from last season. There's no doubt about it. But I have to admit, I started the season fully expecting that, because last season, and I've spoken about this before in shows, so I'm sorry if I just sort of going over what I've said before previously, but it was it was almost felt like a one-off. There was no way this season was going to match last season in terms of passion, in terms of atmosphere. We were all on this emotional journey last season, this unexpected, completely unexpected emotional journey. No one at the start of last season thought what was going to happen. What happened was going to happen, if you see what I mean. And then suddenly we were just all in on it. And it was like, oh my God, Arsenal are in the title race. They're top of the league. This young team who we liked and we have a connection with, but didn't expect to really challenge, is suddenly challenging. And we're all caught up in that emotional sort of journey that Arsenal went on last season. But this season was always going to be different, because once that was a one-off. And once that season's happened, then suddenly it's completely different. This year is all about expectation. It was all about Arsenal have to win the league. If they don't win the league, it's going to be a real disaster. Not everyone had that, but a lot of people had that feeling. And you can kind of sense that in the games now. You go to the games and all around you, it's like, if you're not winning, it's like, we're losing place. We're losing position to Manchester City. And it's just immediately that sort of vibe, I think. And so it is just a little bit different. The expectation's different. I think that's had an impact. As I've said loads of times, I think the absence, well, not the absence, but the cutting of the tickets of the Ashburton Army has made a big, big difference on the atmosphere. They were so influential last season. Absolutely. And the fact that they've had their numbers slashed like they have has made an impact, because they do drive the atmosphere. There's no doubt about it, especially at that end of the ground. So I think that's had a lot, and I hope that the club would look to maybe bring those tickets back. I don't think they will, but I really wish they would, and I think Mikel Arteta would be very keen that they did as well, because he worked really hard last season. Arteta, he wanted that atmosphere. He's talked about it a lot, and he wanted that atmosphere. But there was kind of disagreements between the Ashburton Army and the club over things, and you can. Depending who you speak to on either side of that, you get different views of what those disagreements were about. I know a lot of people point to the ballot system as well, in terms of, who's going to the games, who are getting tickets, who can sit next to each other. So it's something the club will look at. But in terms of leaving early, that's just always going to happen. I think it just is. It was a shame. A lot of people left early at the weekend. And it's hard to criticise, because, it's a nightmare getting out of the Emirates at times. I know that. But I did think, lunchtime kickoff, you're probably not in that much of a rush to get home. Admittedly, the game was done and dusted. It wasn't like, there was any jeopardy on that match. They were 3-0 up at the time. People started to leave. The thing is, though, they missed 2 really good goals. And so you do run that risk on it. But I think there are people in the club who are looking at the issues. looking at it and always trying to improve it. But I'm not sure we're going to see a dramatic change, I have to say. And I don't think the atmosphere's been terrible. There's been some quiet games, like the weekend was pretty quiet. But, you go back to the big games earlier on in the season and the atmosphere was really, really good. So I don't think it's just absolutely awful by any means. I just don't think it's at the level that we saw last season. But we've never seen it at the level we saw last season. It was just so, so different and unexpected. Here's one from Eddie's playlist, who said, a lot of conversation about Smith Rowe, rightly so. Nice to see ESR with some minutes, but Arteta needs to be a little bit braver with his rotation. 5-0 and still no time for Reece either. It's almost as if Arteta waits till clubs bid on squad players such as ESR and Ketia at AMN previously before he gives them minutes. Surely we could have given Saka a rest at 3-0 up and given Reece a run. Yeah, potentially, but I think what you had to remember, I liked Arteta's substitutions at the weekend. I thought they were good. It was good to give Smith Rowe minutes, proper minutes. It was good to give Martinelli minutes, and it worked because he got his goal, and that's his goals, and hopefully that's going to help. I like the fact that he brought on Kiwior and played him in his actual position, albeit is an injury force. But you have to remember, 2 of those substitutes were injury enforced. So if he didn't have to replace Rice or he didn't have to replace Gabriel, then maybe Reece would have come on for maybe 15-20 minutes or so. But two of the subs were enforced, so he had to make those changes because of injury. So maybe so. But look, I do think, it would be nice to see some of these players given minutes. But resting players at the moment, they've just had 2 weeks off. They've got 10 days off now before Nottingham Forest. I don't think you're really in that position where you need to rest players right now. They are very well rested. They're not going to be as well rested as for the rest of the season as they are now. So I don't think there was any absolute necessity to take Saka off at the weekend. But I understand what you're saying. Kyle says, is there any reason we're not looking at Kalvin Phillips on loan? He's an elite player. Loan deal gives us cover so that he can play that deep line role if Partey is going to be unavailable. Yeah, I was talking about this. A few of us were sitting in a press conference before Arteta's presser last week at London Colney, and we were talking about Kalvin Phillips now. We think it would have actually been quite a decent signing for Arsenal. But look, is there a reason we're not looking at him? I don't know if they would have been considering him or not, but I just don't think Manchester City would even consider giving him to Arsenal on loan. Why would they possibly help Arsenal out for the second half of the season? A club that they're fully expecting to be going up against in the title race over the second half of the season. I don't see why they would even consider that, especially when there's so many other clubs that are in for Kalvin Phillips. So ultimately, I think that's probably the reason. Even if Arsenal did fancy him and were interested in getting him over here, I don't think it's something Man City would even entertain at all because of the reasons that I've just mentioned. All right, that's it from today's show, everyone. Thank you very much for watching and listening. As always, really do appreciate your time. And like I said, if you want to get involved in tomorrow's show, please do just hit me up in the comments below with your opinions, questions, comments, anything like that. And I'll get some of them into tomorrow's show. Until then, everyone, have a very good Tuesday. Be back tomorrow to do it all over again. Bye-bye.